Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am the Poverty Princess. Today's video is a little bit different. Some of you guys expressed interest in me doing a dark history of Hazleton video. When I did my walk with me, when I went to the hospital for blood work, and I was showing a bunch of different empty buildings, a little bit of history about them. So I have been basically taking into account what some of you guys have said and quietly doing a little bit of local research, I guess you could say, just so I have some dates and facts set, certain of them. And I thought today would be a good day to do that type of video. I have been having some issues with my knees. I normally get gel injections every 6 months, but my insurance wants to be jackasses. And they won't pay for it. They want me to do a different kind of shot. My rheumatologist doesn't want to go with this other medication because it requires a different injection schedule, and because his office is so busy, he can't guarantee that he would be able to get me in when I'm needed to. I would have to go from 1 shot every 6 months to 3 shots in, I think, a 6-week period. And the wintertime, unfortunately, is a very busy time for my rheumatologist. I don't know why, but it is. So while I'm in limbo with that, and I should have had my injection by the 2nd week of January, when I overdo it, I wind up with baseball-sized swelling in the back of my knees, which is what happened yesterday when I went to bed. That's what I was dealing with. So I'm taking it easy today. I didn't go anywhere, and I decided it's a dreary day out, and it's a good day to talk about a little bit of darkness in my town. Now I am issuing this disclaimer that this video is not for anyone under the age of 13 and probably not suitable necessarily for anyone under 18. There is some graphic details of crimes that may upset some listeners, and so I am just letting everyone know that ahead of time. I'm talking in regards to like several murders that occurred. So if you are at least a little bit squeamish, this video might not necessarily be for you. So with that disclaimer out of the way, because I feel compelled to most definitely state that ahead of time, grab your coffee or tea, kick back, and let me tell you a little bit about tragedy in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Well, let me start with a tragedy that I myself actually only learned of about, I want to say 6 months ago, in a local group on Facebook called You Know You're From Hazleton If. I don't ever remember my family talking about this particular incident I'm going to share with you folks. If they did, I just don't remember it, and it would have stuck out in my mind because of the violence that it basically, portrayed. And it occurred on the street that I live on now, which is rather unnerving too. Probably right up on the next block. Well, it didn't occur at that house. The person and the family that was affected lived, and actually still live, in the house up on the next block from me, which would be up this way, up on the next block going towards the cemetery. It was May 18th, 1965, Election Day here in Hazleton. And a 17-year-old boy by the name of Michael Ruggiero, who lived at 626 Harrison Street, and as I said, family still has that home. He was in his father's car. It was parked next street over, which is called Cleveland Street. He was in his father's car when it exploded on Cleveland Street between Diamond Avenue and 1st Street. So I live on 5th Street, so this would have been like a few blocks down when it happened. The car blew into pieces, damaged properties, cut electricity to around 3,500 PP&L customers, and shattered windows. His father, Joseph, parked the car before going to serve as Judge of Elections at the 14th Ward Fire Station at 7:30 that morning. His son went to pick up the car, and while inside, it exploded. The coroner did not believe that the son was the intended target, that the father was, and the FBI came to Hazleton to investigate. They estimate between 8 to 10 sticks of dynamite were used to destroy that vehicle. Now, I don't know anything about political rivalries back in the day in Hazleton. My family never really talked much about things like that, but it definitely has hints of possibly a mob hit. Dynamite. I mean, that's pretty specific. That is pretty violent. That is pretty definite. It makes one wonder what the political climate was at that time. And with my grandparents gone, I really have no way of knowing. All I could honestly say is this, I just don't remember my family talking about. And I doubt, I could not find any information as to whether or not they ever found out who did it, so I'm imagining it is one of Hazleton's unsolved cases, which in and of itself has, like a lot of, I don't know, like unspoken, like audacity to it, because what kind of person commits a crime like that and can live out the rest of their days and never be bothered by it? And I know maybe we're getting into almost like mind of murderer, serial killer territory here, but when it comes to things like that, I often think that they are like hits, and that the person that probably did it probably wasn't even from the area, did whatever they were paid to do, and left. So odds are that it was not a local person who did that. And that would be part of the problem of why crimes like that were not solved back in the day. Back in that time, Hazleton had traveled from New York and New Jersey by train. We had a train station that was open. There was buses, obviously. So there was access for people to come to this area and for people to leave. My mom used to hop a bus and go down to Philadelphia. When my mom graduated high school in 1940, when she was 17, which would have been 57, 58, my mom did some department store modeling and modeling for a car dealership in Allentown, and also did some department store modeling down in Philadelphia when she was young, and she would stay at my great-grandfather's home down in Philly at that time. And she was able to hop a bus and come back and forth to Hazleton by herself, which nowadays, I mean, you would think is kind of risky, but back then, I guess it was a different climate, a different world, and nobody thought that travel for a teenage girl was unsafe. Least of all going to a bigger city like Philadelphia. Yeah. I mean, I panicked driving through Philadelphia just being on a casino bus on the rare occasion, let alone like actually walk in the streets of Philadelphia. I don't think that you would actually catch me doing that unless I was in a tour group maybe. So, I mean, times change, right? Still, the idea of brutally murdering someone like that is just, like, horrible. And there had to be some type of motive for it, which makes you think, okay, being that it was an election day and everything, were political rivalries that bad in my town? You know, I never really heard my family discuss politics all that much, so I really have no way of knowing what the political climate was in this town. It's not really something I was able to get a feel for. Accessing older newspapers and things, like, I really could not get a feel for that. So I don't know what the motivation may have actually been. I could only, guess. But still, I am led to believe that that was never solved. And as I said, I think that the person came into the area to do that, and probably this next murder occurred months before I was actually born. This happened in March 18th of 1964. I was born December 17th, but the impact of this murder affected me as a little girl because of my mother's reaction to it, and I guess some other mothers too. And I will go into that in a moment. There was a little girl. Her name was Maurice Schiffer. She was 9 years old. She was abducted while on foot from her home on Alter Street to St. Joseph's Memorial School, a few blocks away. And what basically happened was the school was located on Laurel Street. She never made it to school. Her body was found later that day, bound and gagged in a coal mining pit in Milnesville. She was sexually assaulted and strangled, left among garbage. It was the first sexual assault on a child to occur. Hundreds of people were interviewed by police. Interestingly enough, there was a suspect from Nescapec who later committed suicide after this child's death. It has never been solved. I never really understood, per se. We lived a few blocks away from my elementary school. I could have walked to it. There was crossing guards. Never understood my mother's possessiveness until I was in, I think, 3rd grade, and the teachers had gone on strike here in Hazleton, and essentially we were like dismissed from school early, and I had no choice but to walk home. Well, I knew my way home. When I showed up at the apartment, my grandmother was horrified, but I found my way home. My mother threw a fit, and I remember my mother saying something to the effect of, that this murder. Well, when I was in 5th grade, 6th grade, my mother used to walk me to school, and finally the principal just like screamed at my mother that, we lived like 4 blocks away from the school. It was ridiculous that she walked me to school every day and said, "You're embarrassing your child." She's like the only person at 12 years old who is walked to school. Like, you need to let go, you need to stop. And my mother was furious about it, but that's when my grandmother and her decided, like, okay, fine. And I did. I was able to walk to school myself. But I was at the library studying with a friend one day after school, and I asked the librarian about this particular case, and she found information for me. And I read, like, some of the old newspapers about it, and it was horrifying. It was horrible. And as I said, it was never, ever solved. So to think that someone committed this crime against a child and may have, lived out their days having no conscience about it is very scary indeed. The fact that someone did commit suicide who was a suspect, though, is kind of alarming also. Now, several years ago, some retired detectives went through some cold cases here in town and other towns in Pennsylvania, discovered an interesting coincidence, maybe a connection. In a town called Bristol, Pennsylvania, a very similar type of murder occurred. A girl named Carolyn Dougherty, I believe, was at a library and stopped on her way home at a church, which was not far from her home. They found her raped and strangled on the second floor of the church. And that case was really, really odd, because when I read about that online, actually about 2 weeks ago, the priest involved was very, very, shady and weird, and oh my God, I got the creeps reading about that. That priest was totally bizarre. They were able to prove with that little girl's murder that there was more than one person involved. Because of her defensive wounds, they figured that one person held her down while one person raped her. So that leads me to believe that that priest may have seen something, may have known something. I don't know. But that's the impression that I got. Anyway, so detectives made a connection that there was a basketball game here in Hazleton around the time of the Schiffer girls' disappearance, and that there was, at a local gym, St. Joseph's Gym, basketball games. And they were a big thing back in the day. Families used to travel from out of town to cheer on, their school's team. Well, Bristol played Hazleton, and these detectives wondered if perhaps the killer may have come to town, stayed at a hotel maybe, abducted her and murdered her, and then went back to Bristol. But there was never really any proof, but it was a very interesting theory nonetheless. And the similarities in the girls' murders were worth noting as well. To this day, the murder has never been solved. As an adult, I've often felt that she might have recognized her attacker and trusted the person. She might have known him. Or maybe somebody in her family knew him, and so therefore she felt safe with that person. Maybe they offered to give her a ride to school because she had canned goods with her. Something that would have made this child feel comfortable. I find it hard to believe that she would have just willingly went with a stranger. I don't know, even so, it was horrible. Just absolutely positively horrible. They have DNA, though, from whoever did rape her. And several months ago, they actually posted pictures of what the person would have looked like based on the DNA from the semen samples that they had. And they did an age progression of what this person would look like, young, middle-aged, and older. And I thought to myself, well, good Lord, I've seen a guy around town look something like that, Could that be the person? I mean, you don't know. One does not know. Either way, a senseless tragedy, and I hope someday, in my lifetime, that they are able to actually find who did murder that little girl, even if the person is no longer alive still, to get that family closure. Because after all these years, to live with that and not know has got to be very, very hard. And it's definitely a stain on this town that, people may have forgotten about it, but I grew up hearing about it, so I've never been able to forget it. I did mention in that video that Hazleton had the name of Mob City. And I have one of them t-shirts as well that said, I live in Mob City, Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Well, the distinction of being called Mob City had a lot to do with a well-known mafia presence in Hazleton, in Luzerne County, in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. There was a lot of, I want to say, court cases came up in the early to mid 70s of racketeering and bribery and things like that, and ties to the Buffalino crime organization, were mentioned. So this area definitely had a mob influence. Now, my grandparents often alluded that it was that presence that made the town safer. As I said, hardly anybody carried house keys because you didn't need to lock your doors. Crime was rare, far and few, and if you got robbed, it pretty much was somebody that you knew. It wasn't just a total stranger. So there really was not a lot of crime, and Hazleton was considered like an all-American city because of that. There was good jobs, good schools. We had the interstates, which took you to, other cities and other states. Like you could get to New York, you could get to Jersey. So Hazleton was doing good back in the day. There was, however, a tragedy that occurred in 76. It occurred on Valentine's Day. And that was whole family was wiped out, firebombed. And the family's name was Byarsky. This occurred on 23rd and James Street. And the head of the family, was Luzerne County Deputy Sheriff. His name was Eugene Byarsky. Him, his wife Lorraine, and their 3 children, the youngest was only a month old, died when their home was firebombed. Now, at the time that this occurred, Sheriff Byarsky had, I do believe, a court case or court cases pending with racketeering and things with people who had ties to the mob. And perhaps he had been threatened and did not take threats seriously. I don't know. But the tragedy that did occur, the family was definitely targeted as a result of his investigation with his job, obviously, as a Luzerne County deputy sheriff. And the perpetrators of it were paid $200 each. James Masrota, James Sanduch. Other people were implicated as well: Henry Magnum, Ralph Smith, and James Katona. The talk on the street, though, when this occurred, basically was that the family was silenced, again, because of the father's work and criminal investigation. And that wasn't a black strike against the mob here in this area, because who would respect an organization that thought nothing of, God forbid, wiping out a family, a newborn baby? And I graduated in '82, and as I said, Hazleton was pretty safe. But I want to say by mid-80s, late 80s, things started changing a little bit in town, and the presence was not felt as strongly. And I often believe that this firebombing had a lot to do with it because of that stain on it that can never be undone, you know. So you know, some people consider that era the glory days of Hazleton, and then the other people always bring this case up too and say, you know, yeah, that's the flip side of it. There is a band called Filter, I believe, who did a song called Hey Man, Nice Shot. And the song is loosely based on the next incident I'm going to tell you about. And that is of a televised suicide, which did occur. Very much so. There's still a video or two of it floating around. January 22nd, 1987. Bud Dwyer. He was a Pennsylvania treasurer. He committed suicide by gunshot at a televised press conference after being found guilty of taking a bribe. He was scheduled to be sentenced the following day. He passed out envelopes to different members of his staff, took a handgun out of a manila envelope, and put the handgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. That occurred, as I said, on television. I don't remember the time of day that it occurred, and I couldn't find anything online as far as like what time of the day that actually came on, if it was dinner time. I don't remember seeing the video as, you know, a young person. I wasn't a teenager. I don't remember seeing it on TV, but I do remember hearing about it. It was pulled off of the air, obviously, because of the graphicness. In doing the research, I did watch the video. It was very brief, very quick, the clip. And it is upsetting, but nonetheless, this is what some folks unfortunately did have the horror of seeing on TV when they were watching news that day. But Dwyer wasn't the only person to be, you know, guilty of taking bribes. There was a congressman, I believe he was Congressman Dan Flood. He was well loved in Luzerne County. He had taken bribes. There was so much of that in Luzerne County, in all areas, and in so many towns, and so many communities in Pennsylvania. It's like there's not a state that probably hasn't had its share of it. It's, as people say, you know, the love of money, greed. Money is not the root of all evil. It's wanting more than what you need that leads people to do horrible things for it. Money in and of itself is just paper, and it can help make your life better, sure, but when earning it and getting it legally or illegally consumes you, that is when the lust for it and the greed of money overtakes people. So when people say money's the root of all evil, I turn around and say, no, it's not money. Money is just paper. It's when getting it consumes a person and people are not happy with living a comfortable life and just want more and more and more. I mean, how many homes can you live in? How many cars can you drive? How many fur coats can you wear? You can only wear one at a time. Can only live in one home at a time, can only drive one car at a time. How many do you really need? Now, the next two crimes I'm going to talk about, They both hit home to me when I was younger, and these occurred for different reasons. The first one, because I had known this girl briefly from a sewing factory, and so the fact that she was murdered in a murder-suicide was absolutely, like, horrible and very hard to wrap one's brain around. September of 1991, a very pretty young girl by the name of Helen Manfredi and a young man by the name of Daniel Faust, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, their bodies were found in a murder-suicide. The Thursday prior to the murder, they met for the first time. They were half-brother and sister. Helen was stabbed 46 times, tucked under a crawl space of the building that her half-brother, Daniel Faust, lived in. And inside his apartment, he died from a shotgun blast to his face and chest. Now, when this was first ruled a murder-suicide, a lot of people said, how do you shoot yourself, like that one time and you're still alive to do it a second time and do it right? Apparently, cocaine was found in their system, and they believed that, for whatever reason, he stabbed his half-sister and then killed himself, being strung out on cocaine. I've often felt that there was so much more to it that newspapers didn't touch. And, I mean, stabbing the girl 46 times was very personal. Very, very, that says volumes right there. There was so much more that the public doesn't know about that, and one can only wonder. Nobody will ever really know the why, the how, the who, what all occurred. Just a senseless tragedy. I at first had thought, like, oh my God, no, somebody murdered the two of them. But the coroner brought in experts that dealt with blood splatter, and they claimed that no, apparently, I guess when he had shot himself in the chest, he was still alive and was able to, I guess, position the gun differently to shoot himself in the face. Just horrible. Either way, horrible. And two young people gone much too soon. Absolutely terrible. Now, this next case occurred a little over a year later. I didn't know the woman that was murdered, but the guy that they charged with the crime shocked me, terrified me, scared the hell out of me. I'll tell you why in a moment. December 1st, 1992. The body of a 36-year-old Hazleton woman, Janice Dawes, was found beaten to death. She was last seen leaving a local bar a week before. The bar was called Lenny's LA Cafe. It was on Alter Street. Alter Street was considered, even when I was in my early teens, a bad area. Some divey bars over there, and there was also some nicer ones too farther down. But there was like a certain 3-4 block area that was just considered divey, drugs, prostitutes, just like a little bad area of town. So this lady, I would imagine, got a ride from the person, as I said, that I turned out I knew. Whether he made advances to her and she rebuffed him, nobody, I don't know. I don't know. You could kind of guess in your own mind that I guess he didn't take no for an answer. He wasn't a small guy, he was a big guy. and he beat her to death. Maybe he didn't realize that he, God forbid, did that. But either way, he dumped her body. But the horrible thing about it, when this person was charged for it, was at 16, 17, this guy used to give me a ride home. Me and a few of my friends used to party with this guy. And I found him to be humorous, like funny, mellow, laid back, you know, like a little wild and crazy, but nothing like dangerous. So to find out that he murdered someone, it totally terrified me. And I questioned my judgment of people for years after that, because I just never ever would have thought years later he would have been capable of doing something like that. I mean, I believe that he had a child or two of his own at that time. So it really makes you question, you know, like your judgment of a person. I don't know, you know, that one horrified me too. Like, for the longest time I remember saying to Ronnie's dad, like, I just cannot believe that he did that. And as he had said, you know, people change as they get older, you know. The Chaz you knew as a teenager may not be the Chaz that did this, you know, like, you don't know. May 14th, 2009. A lady by the name of Catherine Moore was found bludgeoned to death, bleeding at the bottom. Well, found bludgeoned. She was still alive when she was found, at the bottom of her staircase. She died from her injuries the next day, May 15th. Her killer was never found. There wasn't sign of a forced entry, so often believed that someone she knew came to her home. It was a given that her and her husband used to like to travel to auctions and things. I don't know if robbery may have been a motive. I honestly do not know. But that case has never been solved. And that's another tragedy Hazleton has a stain of. That occurred on Church Street, and I passed that home probably several times every summer. I walk up and down Church Street because the library is on that street, and there's still candles and cards taped on the banister of the home where that murder occurred. I'm very, very sad. Very sad. I mentioned Kids for Cash to Charity, I believe, commenting on one of her videos about how corrupt, you know, in her area was when she was talking about what occurred with one of her daughters. And I had said about Pennsylvania corruption, and I mentioned Kids for Cash, and I said Google it, you can look it up. Well, I'm going to touch on the Kids for Cash scandal. Basically what it centered on was judicial kickbacks to two Luzerne County judges at the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas in Most Fair, Pennsylvania. In 2008, Judges Michael Conahan, and prior to him being a judge, he had been a local magistrate here in Hazleton, and Maurice Schiffer were accused of accepting money in return for imposing harsh adjudications and on juveniles to increase occupancy for profit detention centers, and for profit is in parentheses. There was a business called Miracle that was tied in with this too. They built the detention centers. Schiffer disposed thousands of children to extended stays in youth centers for offenses as trivial as mocking a principal or assistant principal on MySpace. And trespassing in a vacant building. After a judge rejected an initial plea agreement in 2009, a federal grand jury returned a 48-count indictment. 2010, Michael Conahan pleaded guilty to 1 count of racketeering and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 17.5 years in federal prison. Schiffer, always cocky, opted to go to trial, and he was convicted on 39 counts and sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania overturned hundreds of delinquency adjudications in Luzerne County. The Juvenile Law Center filed class action lawsuit against the judges and other parties, and again, that's where Miracle comes in. And Pennsylvania State Legislature created a commission to investigate juvenile justice problems in the county. Governor Ed Rendell, back in 2009, said Schiffer and Conahan violated the rights of as many as 6,000 young people by denying them basic rights to counsel. The Kids for Cash scandal basically was so outrageous when it finally got exposed. It was just disgusting. These two judges basically, well, especially Schiffer, handed out the most outrageous, excessive sentences. There were some kids that were locked up for 2.5, 3 years. And sadly, the lives of some of these kids and their families were changed forever. Some of these kids went on to just have problems for the rest of their lives. One young man committed suicide. Really, really heartbreaking. There's been documentaries done about it. As a matter of fact, I believe there's 1 or 2 here on YouTube. Very, 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 very heartbreaking. My older boys had brief dealings with Judge Schiffer. They were in Camp Adams. It was a one-time thing for both of them. Thankfully, they didn't feel the wrath that some of these other kids did, but still, nonetheless, absolutely horrible, horrible. And again, money. All because of money. The last case I'm going to tell you about, not local per se, it involves, tragically, the body of a woman and her baby that was found. And I'm forewarning that this is going to be a little bit graphic, so if you are squeamish, you may not want to listen to this particular case. This is an unsolved murder ongoing. If you go on WebSleuth, it talks more in detail about this case. There's threads on there about it. There's been so many avenues explored with this, and I think what's heartbreaking about this case the most is that they've never been able to identify who this girl is, what her name is, where she came from. They feel that based on isotope evidence that she may have lived in Tennessee and that South for a few years. They believe that she originally came over from possibly like Serbia, Croatia, somewhere there. The case is referred to as Beth, though. And she is buried somewhere out in Whitehaven, which is not far from Hazleton, Freeland, actually. A 14-year-old boy found remains in the suitcase near the borough of Whitehaven. This was December 20th, 1976. Someone traveling west on the interstate, which was Interstate 81, tossed 3 suitcases over. The impact broke open 2 of the suitcases where this horrible discovery was. Her severed head and her torso were found, and the full-term fetus she had been pregnant with. The unopened suitcase contained her arms and legs. She was deformed facially, I would imagine, to avoid being able to identify her based on facial recognition. Her nose, ears, and breasts had been removed. She had been strangled, then shot, which was rather bizarre. She may have been sexually assaulted. They believe she was of Mediterranean heritage, and she came to the U.S. as a child or teenager, and she may have lived in Tennessee. Now, what has struck me over the years about this case was there was letters and numbers that she had written on her left hand. At the time that her body was discovered, there was a women's center for domestic violence in that was just opening up, not too far off of the interstate. So maybe she had been wanting to go there. Maybe that had been her destination, and God forbid she encountered a real psycho. There's been so many different theories about what happened to this poor young woman. I often thought that perhaps she was going to do a private adoption, because they believe that she was murdered possibly 7 to 24 hours before her body was discovered, and she was due to have her baby at any day. I often wondered if she was doing a private adoption, that perhaps somebody was going to pay her. Maybe she was going to give birth at someone's home, with a midwife. A private adoption. They were more common back in the day. Late 70s, mid 80s, private adoptions were so much easier than they are now. Not uncommon. Also, too, I often thought maybe she was going to be a surrogate mother for someone, and maybe changed her mind, decided she wanted to keep the baby. As I said, there's so many theories abound about what could have possibly happened to this girl. Just a brutal murder, and what was done to her body afterwards, like dismembering her, is just terrible. Somebody with medical knowledge, or at least having worked in like a meat industry, knowing how to, God forbid, do that. I don't know if they did do it yet or not, but there was talk online that they were going to take her DNA and her child's DNA and submit it to a nationwide database looking for possible familial, matchups. I forget what the name of it is, but several unsolved murders now have done that, with the advent of like Ancestry now and a bunch of other different sites like that now, where people can donate their genetic material and find out their background. I hope in my lifetime also that this poor girl is finally identified, that she has her name back. I think find out who she is and where she came from, and you'll be able to find out what her story was, and it wouldn't be hard to find out who murdered her. But first, somehow, someway, there needs to be a break in that case, and this poor girl needs her name. She needs to be identified. I often thought, you know, like so many different possible scenarios. She could have been running from someone. She could have been traveling with someone. Maybe, God forbid, they encountered a person or maybe even a couple, ran into, you know, misfortune. Maybe a serial killing couple. One never knows. I often felt that there was a female component to all of this too, which is why I do believe strongly that maybe she was doing a surrogate mother thing, or maybe a private adoption. As I said, maybe it turned ugly. Maybe, you know, there's also too, the symbolism is not lost on me either, of removing one's ears and one's nose. My grandmother used to say at times about different people, you know, I'd hear the adults talk. So-and-so needs to keep their nose clean. It was an expression I heard a lot when I was a little kid growing up. And removing one's ears, maybe signifying that she heard something she shouldn't have heard. Maybe she was digging around in something that she shouldn't have. So that symbolism was not lost on me with that. I mean, I don't know. There's like 1,000,001 ways that case went, and Lord knows, millions of hours probably spent on trying to find who this girl is. But to date, they still have not found out who she was. And I really hope, as I said, in my lifetime, and I'm 55 now, I hope before I'm in my 80s and that, you know, I hope that that little girl's murder is finally solved, Maurice Schiffer, and I most definitely hope that Beth Doe, they identify who she was. As I said, give her name, find out where she came from, what her story was, and it won't be hard to fill in the blanks and eventually figure out who murdered her and why. And let this poor girl rest. I mean, some people felt that it was a mercy killing, because back in the day, you know, there was a lot of stigma attached with being a single mother in the 70s. Could possibly have been something like that. I mean, we don't know. So many different avenues were explored. Every time there was a lead, it was investigated. But nothing ever 100% panned out. Now, they were able to, in the suitcases, trace newspaper to a town in Jersey. Now, whether she had lived there, they tried to, you know, but nobody fitting her description was reported missing. They have her dental records. They do know she did get dental care up until she was about a teenager, and then it lapsed. They say that her teeth were in bad shape when her body was found. And it could very well be that the pregnancy was caused with that. I worked with women over the years who, every time they had a baby, their teeth started like rotting, and they started having all kind of problems, and the more children they had, the worse their teeth became. So it could have been that particular situation for that young girl. You know, I mean, people kicked around the idea that she could have been a sex slave, held hostage somewhere. I mean, like a lot of different theories. One doesn't know. But I hope that they do, if they haven't already, send her DNA out and her daughter's. Because at least with the daughter's DNA, there would be genetic material from the father. And even if they don't get a hit on her, the mother, at least they may get a hit on the father. Someplace as a starting point is better than, God forbid, than nothing, than just leaving this poor girl's murder be unsolved, you know? Well, guys, as I said, you know, this was a bit of a darker video. I have my legs propped up. I have some swelling in the back of my knees, which is why I decided that a sit-down video today was a good day to do this. I do hope you enjoyed this video, though. learning about some dark history in my town. That would be a wonderful topic for a live chat soon. Everybody's town has dark histories, tragedies, unsolved crimes. It just goes to show, you know, like no community is ever exempt or safe from tragedies. I would like to do a live chat. Well, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this walk down a dark path of some Hazleton's dark, tragic history. The incident with the state treasurer, well, that wasn't a Hazleton issue, still it was Pennsylvania, which is why I included that. Also because of the uniqueness that he committed suicide on television. I felt that was worth sharing as well. And a band actually used that tragedy as inspiration for a song of theirs. You know, I do apologize for the length, but in doing this type of video and researching, it was a little hard to not have a lengthy video, only because I touched on several different instances and things that you know, occurred before my time, and some that occurred now and during my lifetime. It's hard to do a video like that and try to make it a short video, because there are certain details that you do need to cover, you know. So this is probably going to be the first and last video of this length, but then again, this was a topic that was very interesting, and I enjoyed doing the research. You know, I hope those of you who did inquire about it and want me to do a video about some of Hazleton's dark history, I hope you guys are pleased with the video. And you know, if you like it, guys, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit my subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching and staying awake for the length of it. Take care. I will see you guys real soon. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.